to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters. Hello and welcome to the Outer Hour. I'm Tom London with you for the next 60 minutes as we examine the serious topic of electoral reform. We've got the brains. We've got like a brains trust on the show tonight. Andrea van Heerden, attorney and senior legal project manager at OUTA, will bring us up to date on the Concourt AARTO challenge. OUTA was in court yesterday, not just any court, the Constitutional Court of South Africa. And then, first time on the show, Dr. Sitembile Mbete, who is a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria, amongst many other roles. I think she's got 3 different hats. We'll see which ones she wears tonight or how she interchanges. She knows more about electoral reform than most people in South Africa, so we're going to dip into her knowledge. Join us as we discuss electoral reform, and then making up the trio of guests on the show tonight, our very own Rachel Fisher. Rachel Fisher is OUTA's Parliamentary Engagement and Research Manager down in the Mother City in Cape Town. Now, you know that it's customary on the show that when we started, we look for the first person to join us in the comments section, and the first person to join us in the comments section gets honorary Chief Whip status. Now, Claire Feldman is normally first up, but will she be beaten to Chief Whip status tonight? Who will be our Chief Whip? We'll do a couple of hellos as you join us, and don't forget to like and share the program as you do. Well, our first viewer in the comment section tonight comes out of the YouTube feed for a change, not Facebook. It's Vut Zako. Hey, Chief Whip status to you, Vut or VUT. You've still never told me whether you're Vut or VUT. We've got Ben Fraser. Good evening, says Ben from a windy Cape Town. Thank you, Ben. Nice to see you. Claire Feldman, you were pipped at the post. Claire says, hi, Artarians. Fikile Dada, how's it, Fix? Fix says, good evening, Artarians. Andrea van Heerden will be on your screen and inside the comment section this evening. And more will join us. We'll pop the hellos up on screen as you join us this evening. Remember, as you join us, hit that like and share button, and let's get this program out to more and more South Africans. We have an election coming up in 2024. Are you ready? Are you prepared? Are you armed with knowledge? Knowledge is power. Eh? Faiza Ravat says, good evening, everybody. How's it, Faiza? Good to have you on board. Denise Saul Jacobs says, good evening, team. We'll do a couple more. Olawasian, thank God, is on board. How's it? Good to have you on board. Nice to see your name in the screen. And as I said, as your hellos come in, we'll pop them up on screen this evening, and we'll say hello to you in good old South African fashion. Well, you know, I'm looking at the goings-on in the American midterm elections, and Donald Trump announcing he's going to be running for president again, or at least up for nomination. And the world shakes its head, and some go rah, rah. And you look around the world and you wonder what's going on in the political systems worldwide. It seems as if we've lost the plot and the world has become a bit of a circus. And South Africa is no exception. We've been pushing for this electoral reform for some time now. Is it going to work? Is it going to happen? Are we going to get to see the changes that we as South Africans and voters want? And what is the latest news when it comes to electoral reform? As always, your comments and questions are welcome in the comment section. I see you chatting to each other now. It's nice to see this community that's building in the comment section. Remember, you can chat to Andrea. She's in there as well. I think Rachel Fisher might join you, and chat to each other. And then I'll look for the questions in the comments, and we'll pop them up on screen as they come through. Well, let's say good evening firstly, shall we, to Rachel Fisher, OUTA's Parliamentary Engagement and Research Manager, and just to find out how things are in the Mother City. How's it, Rachel?
Hello, Tom, and hello to all our viewers from across South Africa and hopefully around the globe as well. It is windy today in Cape Town, but there's a lot of things happening as in tonight's show, looking at electoral reform. So we are continuing to try and pressure on Parliament. Now the ball is with the National Council of Provinces. So it really is keeping us busy, together with the various engagements we have with other civil society organizations on this topic.
Now, I've got a feeling, Rachel, that our guest this evening, Dr. Mbete, you've got something to do with that. Why do we have the esteemed doctor on board tonight? I'm asking you, Rachel.
Rachel, do you want to answer?
Yeah, I'm asking Rachel.
Okay. Yes. So, you know what, Tom? I think first of all, right, because we get critical about maladministration and how the public's funds are being used, and this whole process around electoral reform, we are critical about the lack in public education and public awareness on this topic. Now, this is made even worse by the complexity of this bill. So we then realized if we want to unpack it and engage with the public and educate the public, we need to put materials on the table that can do so, that is more accessible and understandable. But how do you take all this research out there, everything happening, and packaging it? So we got a great solution, and we got one of the absolute experts in South Africa to attend to that crucial gap. And that is why we have Dr. Mbete here.
Dr. Mbete, thank you for joining us and welcome to the OUTA Hour. I see amongst your titles is Senior Lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at UP. You're a Director of Programs at Future Elect and a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Electoral Reform. This is truly your playground, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Tom, and hi to everyone who's joining us. Yes, so I've been analyzing elections and South African elections since 2009 when I was a student at UCT, and then went on to work for an organization called IDASA, which is now closed, doing analysis of the 2011 elections, and then when I was at UP, the 2014, 16, 19, 21, and we'll do 24 as well. So I've been working on electoral reform for about 13 years now, and I was appointed by Minister Aaron Motsoaledi to be on the Ministerial Advisory Committee that was advising him on how the Electoral Act should be amended to comply with the Constitutional Court judgment in the New Nation movement from 2020. And I was on there were 8 members of the committee. 7 of us had a vote on how we couldn't agree on a single way to amend the act. 3 members of the committee proposed a minimal amendment to the act just to allow independent candidates to contest. And then 4 of us proposed that we actually need fundamental electoral reform. There have been 3, if I'm correct, reports to Parliament, 4 actually, since 2003, starting with the Van Zyl-Slabbert report, the high-level panel report that was chaired by Kgalema Motlanthe, former President Kgalema Motlanthe, and several others that have all proposed a constituency type system, or the inclusion of a constituency kind of system at national and provincial level. And so we said this is an opportunity for us to do fundamental change to the electoral system. Unfortunately, our view was not picked for the eventual Electoral Amendment Bill that was introduced to Parliament and is currently being discussed by the National Council of Provinces.
What keeps you in this field, and why do you think it's so important for South Africans to focus on electoral reform?
Well, if democracy is government by the people, for the people, fundamental to that is the election, right, is voting. And how we vote is really, really important in order for us to choose a government that represents the will of the people in general, and that can also be held accountable by those people. And so elections are critical to the functioning of a democracy, and I think that we haven't paid enough attention to how our electoral system works. A lot of South Africans don't understand.
Well, I was just about to point you to a comment that Claire Feldman has put up on screen. It's up on screen now. Claire says, severe lack of knowledge with regards to the Electoral Amendment Bill and Act. And I'm jumping on what you've just said, that there just seems to be a lot of lack of knowledge. I don't want to use, perhaps the word is ignorance. Why don't South Africans generally know about the electoral system and the changes that you feel need to be made?
We have very little.
Is it too complicated for us?
The thing is, once you start telling people about it, they get it.
Okay.
So there's just nobody telling people, or there aren't enough people who are trying to talk about it. And so a lot of what I've been trying to do over the last 2 years is to just speak in as many platforms as I can to explain what our current system is, what the kind of changes are that we need to it, and what the options are for change. Because there are many ways you could change our electoral system, but I think that it suits, vested interests and those in power for people to not know what their options are.
You'd expect that the ruling party would want to maintain the status quo, but it seems to me from the outside looking in that political parties across the board are quite comfortable with the current system.
Yes, they are. And I'm going to explain to you why they are. So our current system is what we call a closed list proportional representation system. The voters vote for the party, and parties put together lists of candidates that they would want to have let's just talk about the National Assembly here, that they would want to have in the National Assembly, from the person that they want the most to the person that they would want the least. And so for the 400 seats in the National Assembly, 1 to 400 if you're a big enough party. And the parties have complete control over how they make those lists. The party members don't have a say, voters in general don't have a say. That's why we call it a closed list, right? And then voters vote for the party, and the seats in Parliament, in the National Assembly, are divided according to the proportion of votes that a political party wins.
Yeah.
Now, this system works really well for party elites and party leaders because they have complete control of who represents them and their voters in the National Assembly. And the people that are then put on that list are really only accountable to the party leaders and to the party elites that get them onto the list, because you need to keep those people happy. If those people are not happy, they can remove you from Parliament. And so for all political leaders, political party leaders, whether they are from a big party or a small party, it's actually a great system for them because it gives them a whole lot of control over their representatives in the National Assembly. Now, the issue here, right, even though the New Nation movement was about allowing independent candidates to run, I think a lot of what the parties are trying to resist is for their individual MPs to have to contest for election as individuals that represent a party, but as individuals instead of being just put onto a list by the party. Because if an MP is elected by a constituency as an individual, yes, as an individual that represents a party, but still as an individual, then that MP has to account both to the constituency.
That's right.
And to the party
We'd take a harder look at them as voters, wouldn't we?
Don't want that.
No.
Exactly. And parties don't want that, to be quite frank.
It gets even messier because before you even get to nominate those names, we've got, conferences and elective conferences inside parties and branches voting for NECs, for example, in the case of the ruling party. And before we even get to elections, the names and the deals have been done.
Exactly. And so a huge part of what the wrangle is, I think, here is that it is about diluting the power of party leaders, and that's one of the main reasons why political parties across the board have been so resistant to this change.
So you mentioned as you came onto the show that you're working with a number of projects. What are you? You said you've been talking about this. You're passionate about it. You've been spreading the word, so to speak. What are your current projects?
So I mean, I've been doing the theoretical work on the electoral system and looking at all the different options. I'm currently working for an organization called Future Elect, full-time, that was started by Lindiwe Mazvugo, who's the former parliamentary leader of the DA. But we do leadership training for young people who want to run for office. The organization's been operating since 2018. We're currently recruiting our 5th class that's going to start in 2023. And young people from all over Southern Africa who want to be political leaders, because we take for granted that the right people with political ambitions are going to get to the top. And that's not always the case. And we can see all over the world that that's definitely not the case.
Yeah.
And so if you want your best and brightest and most ethical young people to become political leaders, you actually need to intervene and give them the skills, the capacities, the networks that they need to be able to do so.
It's almost worrying hearing that line that, talking about people with political ambition. I'm not quite sure what political ambition equates to in today's world. Do you almost have to find people who aren't politically hungry and switch them on to the idea that politics is the way to go?
Yes. So we've got a mix of people that are interested in doing the program. Some are already involved in politics, but that's a minority of the people that we have. And then a lot of them are outsiders. And the big thing about it that we want to do is to change how people, and young people particularly, view politics. We want them to think of politics as beautiful, as a positive force for change. Because the reality is, Tom, that the 400 MPs that are currently in the South African Parliament, in the South African National Assembly, oversee a budget of 2.1 trillion rand of spending that the government makes. That government spending is overseen, the oversight for that is with the 400 MPs in the National Assembly.
Yeah.
Are those the people that we really want to be overseeing how our government spends
Well,
money?
what do the youth say when you deal with young people? And I don't know whether young people get a bad rap in South Africa, but every time there's an election, we're told that young people didn't go out to vote, young people aren't interested in politics, etc., etc. But these are just media headlines. What do you see when you talk to young people in South Africa?
Young people are deeply frustrated by the system. They don't see the system as a means for change. All they see, and this is another reason why we need electoral reform, is they see a system where the same political parties remain in power, the same leaders of those political parties remain in power, no matter how old they are. And this is, this is a commonality across political parties. And so young people don't see elections as the way to make political change. That's why young people organize protests. And they do all sorts of stuff on social media because that's where they see change actually happening. And so what we need to do is we firstly need to communicate to young people what they can actually do within the formal systems of politics. So whether that's elections, whether that's public participation processes, because all of these things are there. But secondly, we also need to work to amend our electoral system so that it can be one where voters have actual power and can actually hold their leaders accountable. Because then we give young people an incentive to be to participate in elections and to become more and more active in the formal processes of democracy.
Sure. In our first segment tonight, if you've just joined us, we're talking about electoral reform. Coming up on the OUTA Hour, Andrea van Heerden, Senior Legal Project Manager at OUTA, will update us on the latest challenge and what happened in the Concourt. So yesterday or the day before, we'll find out when we chat to Andrea van Heerden in the second part of the show. Right now, we're chatting electoral reform with Dr. Sitembile Mbete and our very own Rachel Fisher. Let me ask Rachel what's happened with the electoral amendment bill since we last spoke. I think we spoke at the end of October, Rachel. What's happened since then? It wasn't great news
Tom.
then.
So when we last spoke, National Assembly just passed the bill and then it was handed over for the National Council of Provinces to go through their rounds of public participation. Now, the call went out and on the 29th of October, and the deadline was the 9th of November. A very short period for anybody to participate. Quite interestingly, the public participation for this was only via submission of written statements on email. There was no public participation programs actively in person taking place, no education and information sharing sessions. So what OUTA did was to send individual emails to each of the Standing Committee for Security and Justice, the members on that committee, asking them what are they doing to raise awareness, to inform the public, to get them to engage actively on this. And unfortunately, because this bill is tagged as a Section 75 bill, and we go into detail with that in the research report, NCOP isn't mandated to have such an in-depth, intense public participation session, which is unfortunate because it influences provinces as well as the national scope and the National Assembly. And this is a point that is not being driven home. So now last week it closed, and what we are looking for the next big post is the ultimate deadline that Concourt has stipulated. This is the 10th of December. Now, you might recall from previous sessions, the original deadline was the 10th of June. So this is already an extended deadline.
You've been working, I said with you, OUTA's been working with My Vote Counts recently, and you've released a research report on electoral reform. How did this come about? How did the collaboration come about?
Yes, so this is exactly speaking to the point of how can we be critical to government and parliament for not doing something, but we are not willing to do that something. We also have to be responsible when we want to make judgment because, how are we addressing this gap? So funding was procured from the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung to work on such a public education campaign. And this consists of basing what we are doing in good foundational research. Hence why we have Dr. Mabeti here. Then on this campaign, we are also preparing education leaflets and pamphlets for distribution with crucial core information. Why is voting important? What does electoral reform mean? And we will soon then have a webinar on this and then a video campaign. But essentially, when you think in South Africa, why is voting important? You think about vote counts. And it's through this collaboration that we've got this report, and we have Dr. Mabeti with us.
Let's ask Dr. Mbete about this research report and what's contained in it. Sitembile?
Yes, of course. So, one of the things when I was asked to do this research report was just explain, firstly, what the journey of electoral reform has been, right, in South Africa since 1994. And something that a lot of people don't know is that the current closed list proportional representation system that we have was meant to be a temporary measure. In 1993, all the main parties in the constitutional negotiations agreed that they would that we needed an electoral system to have an election in 1994, but we needed one that was easy to implement, that would be understandable for most people, and that wouldn't be too complex, right? Because the majority of the country had never voted before. And so that is why they introduced the proportional representation system, but it was only supposed to be for the 1994 election. So written into the 1993 interim constitution was that a new permanent electoral system would be developed. When the constitution was done, but the 1996 constitution and in those constitutional negotiations, they decided to kick for touch and not deal with with electoral reform, which is why the electoral system that we currently have is in Schedule 6 of the Constitution, whose heading is transitional arrangements. And that just points out how much this was meant to be a transitional arrangement.
Am I correct in saying that this was all taking place around the time we were getting used to that term government of national unity, when we had ministers from different parties being included in government?
Yes, and this is one of a proportional representation system is one of the ways that you achieve a government of national unity in that way. And so the Van Zyl-Slabbert Commission that was introduced in 2002 was set up to do the process of developing a new electoral system. They sent their report to Cabinet in 2003. It was never implemented. It was another case of the minority won out. So the majority of the people of the Commission thought that it should be changed, and the minority thought that everything was fine and shouldn't be, and that's the position that won out. And there have been all sorts of stop-start attempts to open up the discussion on electoral reform. And so I go through all of that in this research report just to give people context. I then also give an overview of the different kinds of electoral systems that exist and their advantages and their disadvantages, and explaining how the South African system fits into that, and what the options could be for change. And then I go through the Ministerial Advisory Committee process and what the discussions were, how it was set up, and then looking then specifically at this electoral amendment bill that is currently being discussed in Parliament, and then, give some ideas around how we can mobilize around this. And I think that, the New Nation movement really started a process, and we mustn't see this current debate that's going on in Parliament as the end of the process. We must actually see it as a step in the beginning of the process to be able to build a campaign around electoral reform for people to actually engage on how do they want to be represented. It's fundamental to representative democracy is how you are represented. And I think all South Africans should have an opportunity to have a say in that.
Let me ask you a question I didn't think I'd ask you tonight, do you think we'll have an election in 2024? I mean, if there are constitutional challenges against the electoral bill and they continue, could that bleed over past election time?
So this is the part of the real gravity of the situation that we're in, right? And I spoke to parliamentarians about this last week, and I'm going to say this to your viewers, is that the Constitutional Court declared the Electoral Act of 1998 unconstitutional because it doesn't allow individuals to participate, and suspended that declaration of unconstitutionality for 2 years until the 10th of June, and gave Parliament a chance to amend the Act to fix that. Parliament didn't do that. They've now continued that suspension until the 10th of December. What that means is that after the 10th of December, we do not have constitutionally sound legislation with which to run an election in 2024. So the urgency of the process that's happening in Parliament comes from there. And unfortunately, members of Parliament from all political parties were sleeping on the job, to be quite frank. The Home Affairs Committee in the National Assembly that was discussing this only spoke about the electoral reform bill 6 times between June 2020 and February of 2022. 6 times. They met to discuss other things, but not this reform. And it's been this mad rush in 2022, which has now stuck us with a subpar bill that's not really fit for purpose. And that's got all sorts of sort of constitutional issues with it. So it seems to me that we need to find some sort of compromise, that if we want to have an election in 2024, this very unsatisfactory piece of legislation may be what we need to use for the 2024 election, this amendment bill or amendment act. But I think that what we need to really fight for is that included in that bill be a provision that says this legislation will only apply to 2024. And the Parliament of 2020 that's elected in 2024 must develop a new electoral system for South Africa. And I think the language that's used is going to be really important. Because otherwise, if we don't, I think it's highly unlikely that the Constitutional Court will delay the 2024 election. They didn't delay the 2021 election. And so I think it's highly unlikely that they will. And I don't know if we want the current parliamentarians to stay on beyond 2024.
Well, they're getting old now.
So we'll need to have some sort of interim measure, some sort of transitional arrangement that this time isn't made permanent, but actually leads to real change.
It always fascinates me that those talks around CODESA and what the agreements that were made, so many were, as you say, were not meant to be permanent arrangements. And here we are 28 years later, still living with the impermanence or the I'm trying to search for the right word. I want to use flakiness, but I think that would be a bit naughty. But it just surprises me that so many years later we haven't got our act together, so to speak, if you'll excuse the pun. And I'm looking at some of the comments on screen. Like BB Bowman says, the people on the list are not necessarily selected for their experience and abilities and value systems. We're talking about MPs, and this I hear from almost everybody I talk to in South Africa. Don't politicians realize that this is something that needs to be addressed and fixed ASAP?
They do, but it doesn't go, it's not in their interest to change it ASAP, regardless of what political party they come from. And this is really where people's power needs to play a role. People need to put pressure on the politicians to act correctly. That's the only way that we can achieve change. And so that's why I speak about this bill wherever I can. Because it's the only way that we're going to force the politicians to change. And the person who commented that the MPs aren't put on the list because of their experience or because of their qualifications. It's often because of reasons of political expediency, right? And so we need to have some way of impacting that.
Yeah, and how often do we hear that word force nowadays when it comes to politics and politicians and political parties, that we, the people, have to force politicians to do the right thing. Rachel, does OUTA have any other electoral reform campaigns planned? I know you're very active in this space.
Yes, we do continue to be. So once again, linked to this report is the distribution of leaflets and a visual campaign that will appeal to the public. And that is really important. As soon as something does become more complex, it does have an alienating factor. So functioning within the public interest, we will be pushing that. But you know what, Tom, together with where we are seeing Parliament slacking on this, which they clearly have done, we are seeing very enlightening and which is really encouraging is the amount of civil society organizations, other interested parties coming together on this topic and putting pressure on Parliament. We can sense a feeling with the National Council of Provinces that the circumstances that they currently are in, to get a bill through with less than a month to go and trying to get it to the president, this is not going to work. So out of 2.5 years, you only give them 1 month to evaluate this thing and do something that is of constitutional importance. We are very much remaining involved with all these other CSOs, and we will continue putting pressure on Parliament. And if that requires being more forceful, if it requires legal or other forms of action, we will critically evaluate our options and continuing with this.
Engagement, engagement is in your title, Parliamentary Engagement and Research Manager. That's what you do with members of Parliament. And Parliament, you engage with them. I always get nervous when we talk about engaging with Parliament around December, around Christmas time. What happens with the engagement process as we roll towards the December holidays?
Well, unfortunately, parliamentarians are going on constituency leave from the 5th of December, the 15th, and then it's over onto their personal leave period. So when this bill has to get passed, essentially it's within the leave period. So some special conditions need to be taken in for consideration if NCOP either extends this process of evaluation of the bill, or to consider if there was some form of we call it a sunset clause introduced. So Parliament is shutting down in December. So what can we do?
Good question. Wow. Dr. Mbete, I could talk to you the whole night, I must be honest, and I think our viewers would agree with me. You're just a font of information, and I've learned listening to you speak tonight. Unfortunately, the electoral bill and the problems we've got in our electoral system are not the only ills in South Africa. We've got to talk about AARTO, and next week we'll have another couple of subjects to contend with. But what message do you have for our OUTA Hour viewers and South Africans in general as we close this discussion on the show tonight?
soak up as much information as possible about how the political system works. Look at the Constitution, read about the Electoral Reform Bill. As soon as we make this report available, read it. It is long, but look out for all of the other communication, all the videos, all the pamphlets, and really get to know your system, because political leaders are relying on your ignorance to get away with things.
Dr. Sitembile Mbete, thank you for joining us tonight. You're welcome to stay till the end of the program, but we don't expect it. So if you're going to leave now, we'll say thank you very much for your time.
And head out. Thank you so
great.
much.
But before you go, whenever we have guests on the show, whenever people from outside of the organization come and speak on the show, you know what I'm left with? I'm left with this thought. And the thought is, why can't people like Dr. Mbete run this country?
I have dedicated my life to teaching the people.
You see, but go into politics and save us, Doctor.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks
it's good
so
to have
much.
you on our side. Thank you, Dr. Mbete, for joining us this evening. Dr. Mbete is a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria, as well as the Director of Programs at Future Elect, a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Electoral Reform. Wow, what a guest, Rachel. Thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing Dr. Mbete onto the show tonight. She's impressive, isn't she? Oh, I think you might be on mute. So
amazing. No, she's absolutely great. And, this is what we need going forward, is having informed opinions and encouraging the public to read more and understand better what is happening. Yeah,
too true. Okay, on to topic number 2. And tonight we bring you an update on the AARTO Challenge. Now, if you're a regular viewer to the AUTA Hour, you know that we've spent many hours talking about AARTO. You'll know, and you would have traveled the journey with us when it was declared unconstitutional by the High Court in this country. I hope I'm not getting anything mixed up. Andrea van Heerden will correct me if I'm wrong. It's now made its way to the steps and into the chambers of the Constitutional Court. OUTA was in the Constitutional Court yesterday, and Andrea van Heerden, Senior Legal Project Manager, updates us on what went down. What happened yesterday, Andrea, and welcome back to the show.
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for having me again. It's a pleasure to be here and to chat to the Outarians out there. So just before I get to what happened in court, I think just again, it's necessary for us just to explain what the journey was. And
Isn't it just? Okay, go for it.
Right, so the AARTO Act, as we all know, the Act itself is still enacted and has been enacted in only Gauteng. So 2 metros, Johannesburg and Tshwane. But then in 2015, 2016, the AARTO Amendment Bill was introduced in Parliament. And this amendment bill will expand, or the idea of this amendment bill was to expand AARTO so it would be effective across the country. That's the one major difference. And then the other part of it is that the demerit point system will also go live. Now, the demerit point system was always part of the initial AARTO Act, but they've never implemented it. So when that amendment bill was introduced, OUTA participated. We wrote to the minister raising our concerns. We wrote to the president twice. We presented to Parliament on these issues. We even participated in the public participation process. And after all that effort and all that engagement, nothing happened and government didn't listen. So our last resort was to institute legal action, which we did. And I think it was in October 2020. June 2020, we instituted this legal action. And then in October 2021, last year, October, this matter was heard in the High Court. And on January this year, the High Court agreed with OUTA, saying that the High Court believes both the acts, the AARTO Act and the AARTO Amendment Act, should be declared invalid and unconstitutional. Now, unfortunately, it didn't end there because it's legislation and forms part of the executive function of our government. Remember, our government is divided into 3 spheres where the executive can make legislation. But the Constitutional Court, the judicial system or the judicial leg of our government can override it. And unfortunately, only the Constitutional Court can confirm the order of unconstitutionality.
Of the High Court, okay.
the High Court
and so
order.
that's
exactly
why you're
what
in the Constitutional Court. So
that's
the
correct.
Constitutional Court, in layman's terms, is either going to agree with the High Court judgment or disagree with that judgment. Is that correct?
Agree.
Now,
That is absolutely correct.
when you go to court, it can't just be one party in the matter. There must be more. Who are the parties in this matter in the Concourt?
So in February, we applied to the Constitutional Court to confirm this High Court judgment. And then that confirmation the judgment was appealed by the minister, who was the first respondent. So it's the Minister of Transport. And then the RTIA, it's the Road Traffic Infringement Agency. This is the agency that was created by the AARTO legislation to administer the system. Then later on, also the RTMC, which is the Road Traffic Management Corporation, also asked the Concourt that they can intervene in the matter. So they were also responded. And interesting enough, the city of Cape Town also asked the court if they could be joined as a friend to the court.
Why would the city of Cape Town do that? Because this doesn't affect them, or does it?
It does, and that is exactly part of AARTO's argument. It directly affects municipalities and provinces. And because there's a lot of legalese and there's a lot of technical terms.
Give us AARTO's argument for those who have just joined us or have forgotten.
Right, so AARTO's argument was based on this concept of executive and legislative competence. Now, what does that mean for the layman? So it means that in terms of the Constitution divides government up into municipalities, provinces, and national government. And certain areas are the sole responsibility of certain spheres of government. So the Constitution gives municipalities and provinces an exclusive executive and legislative competence over how they regulate their traffic. So their traffic regulation or their fines, enforcement, etc. So that is a competence that's given by government or by the Constitution to local and provincial government. What the AARTO Act does, and this is AARTO's argument, is that the AARTO Act creates national legislation and enables national government to directly interfere into municipalities and provinces, telling them how they should do it. So they encroach on their constitutional right to regulate their own traffic infringements or traffic regulations. And that is the crux of our argument. So when you look at creating legislation, we agree that national government and the Constitution, fortunately and unfortunately, gives them this right to create legislation. In terms of Section 44(2) of the Constitution, national government can create legislation that encroaches on the legislative executive of municipalities if they can prove that it's necessary and there are other hurdles that they have to overcome. But nothing gives national government the right to encroach on municipalities and provinces' executive competence. And that is where our case lies. We're saying national body, national government can't interfere with the working of a municipality.
Why do you think government were hell-bent on getting AARTO through?
Well, I have my own personal reservations or my own personal...
Because I'm seeing comments coming in on the comment section, people saying it was just a money-making exercise.
Well, it is, if you look at how it is structured. But and not just that, I think government has good intentions with creating acts, or in enforcing law enforcement or regulating traffic enforcement. I get that. But what they in essence are doing is they're taking the enforcement of traffic offences out of the courts and placing it into an administrative system. And that's where the problem lies. Because again, and I say this over and over and over on AUTA Hour, the best prediction of future behavior is past behavior. And just as with the e-tolls, it was grounded or founded on an administrative system. AARTO is exactly the same. And unfortunately, government won't be able to exercise it. It's an elaborate system, elaborate scheme. The normal road user won't even know exactly what their rights are in terms of AARTO. But in terms of the CPA, the Criminal Procedure Act, which actually places in the courts of law, the magistrates' courts, that you have to appear if you do not agree with your fine, government saying that system has failed. And that's why they created this administrative system. It is a system that hasn't even, there's no proof in the pudding, to put it bluntly. It's been enacted for 10 years in Gauteng. And can we honestly say that road fatalities has decreased?
Well, I was just about to say, every South African knows that we live in one of the most dangerous countries in the world if you want to operate a vehicle or walk or run on one of our roads in South Africa. And anything that would improve road safety, genuinely improve road safety in South Africa, I'm sure would get the support of South Africans. I'm looking at a comment that's come in from Vut to say, but don't we want a demerit system? And I look at that and I think, well, I know, in Australia, for example, and I've watched enough of those driving drunk in Australia programs to know that when those guys come back from the bar and they don't have enough points left, they never drive a car again, at least not for the next 6 months or 12 months, and they learn a lesson. And it seems logical to do this. On the other hand, I think, and I'm always deeply suspicious of traffic enforcement and rules enforcement in this country because we know what happens on the side of the roads in South Africa. And today, I don't know how accurate it is. It was just before I came on air. I was scrolling through Twitter and there was a post where metro police vehicles were being repossessed by the car hire company that hires the vehicles to the department. Now, I don't know whether any of that's true, but it doesn't surprise me to see a post to see that, hold on a moment, we hire police cars to the metro police, and then they don't pay, and then we repossess, and this is the nonsense that goes on at ground level, and at the same time we're trying to fix things at a national level. It all just seems crazy. Don't we want? And I'm just going to go back to Vut's point, and that is, don't we want a demerit system?
Well, Tom, let me put it this way. From the start, AARTO has always said that we support safer roads. We support government if they introduce systems and legislation that will actually increase road safety. We're all for that. And yes, a demerit point system might work. It might be of huge benefit. The question is, how is it going to be implemented? That's the question. So, even if you think, hypothetically speaking, we use a national demerit point system, that's great. But who needs to enforce it? The municipalities need to enforce it.
And here's a comment that's come in from Chantel Brummer, right? Chantel says, bring back the old system where all municipalities and traffic departments administrate their own fines. You agree?
But that's exactly what's happening in the rest of Gauteng, or the rest of, the rest of the country currently. Yeah. It's only Gauteng that's not operating like that. And that's exactly what we're saying, exactly what Chantal mentioned there. That is the exclusive executive competence of a municipality. That's what they should be doing. But this legislation doesn't enable them, and it actually gives government the right to intervene there. And
I got to agree with Chantel Brummer. Yeah. I just go back. I have the advantage of being 50 years old now, so I can say 32 years ago, when I got a driver's license and I lived in a little town on the East Rand called Springs, I knew if I didn't stop at the stop street, there might be what we called in those days a speed cop. A speed cop could be hiding behind a bush, and when if my wheel just went a meter past that line, even if I stopped, that speed cop would jump out and enforce the law and enforce the rules. And there was very little chance that I could bribe the guy. And so I was in trouble. And then I had to go to the prosecutor if I wanted any kind of leniency before the... I said, can you give me a discount? Or, and then they say, around 50% or no. And then you go off to court or pay the fine or whatever. Nowadays, I don't know. I don't know how many South Africans actually take infringement seriously.
That's exactly the point, Tom, and that's one of the things that we mentioned. We're saying, it's fine, if you want to introduce a demerit point system, we actually did international best practices research on how it works in different countries around the world. And majority of the countries have had success. But we say our quickest fix and the most effective fix is more visible policing. Here's a question. When in our country's period, let's say for the past 25 years, when do you think were our roads one of the safest to travel on?
2010, when there was maximum, this is a guess, right? 2010, when there was maximum police visibility and law enforcement on the roads because we couldn't afford any embarrassments.
And you are exactly correct. So look at the impact that visible policing had during the World Cup during 2010. as opposed to now. And that is what we should do. You should train police officers, you have more visible policing, invest the money into systems that we already have, and iron out the deficiencies in the existing system.
Fix what's broken. Yeah.
Creating exorbitant new administrative systems, which you don't even know is going to work.
We're obsessed with that, didn't you know, as a country? When something doesn't work, we invent something more complicated to try and get right and forget the easier way of doing things. We'll just have a couple of meetings and conferences and make it even more difficult to work.
Exactly. And I just want to come back to one of the comments that you read out earlier about the system about money making. Now, the thing is, at the end of the day, government can deny it as much as they'd like. But this is my opinion. This is Andrea van Heerden's personal opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
At how the AARTO Act is structured. Basically, for the administration of the system, you have a central agency, is the RTIA. Now, as the AARTO Act stands, what it means that if a municipality collects money for infringement or from a ticket fine,
they got to give it to the National Treasury.
They have to give half of that to RTIA, this agency. Whereas, as it currently is, if a municipality, except now for Gauteng, if another municipality collects the fine, they get 100% of this profit or this fee. So it's a very steep administrative cost that municipalities have to pay the agency and national,
and the motivation
is implemented.
And the motivation, if you're a municipality and all of those fines and that money collected goes into your your treasure chest, you've got motivation to go out there and find people. But if you're giving it away to Treasury or RTIA, the motivation simply isn't there to go and collect the fines or even enforce them. But okay, Jeff P. Scott says, what we really need is police visibility. Goes back to your point on 2010. We need to no need to disadvantage people. Emil, I'm not sure whether it's Emil or Emily, but I'll go with Emil. Grindling says, the AARTO Act also assumes you are guilty and you have to prove yourself innocent. The Constitution works the other way around, says Emil. Is that correct?
Well, that's not necessarily correct in terms of guilt or innocence because it's an administrative system. So basically what it means is it's not as the legislative or the judicial arm where you are guilty of an offense and you have to appear before court. Remember, AARTO only creates a schedule of offenses for infringements. So it's not an offense that you have to prove your innocence. The CPA will still regulate offenses. AARTO is only infringements. So that is on an administrative law system. And in administrative law, you can't be found guilty or innocent.
But it falls short there. It falls short there too, doesn't it, Andrea? Because I remember from previous conversations, you were saying the infrastructure just isn't there. You know, if you want to object, if you want to get hold of people, I think you mentioned 2 years ago. I remember a number of 16 people for the whole country.
That is the new institution that's created. So the whole AARTO system is a very, very elaborate system, administrative system. So if you get a fine, you have certain elections that you can choose to do. So, for instance, if it wasn't your vehicle, it's a clone number plate, whatever the circumstances are, you can then exercise the election to make a representation. Yeah. So that's basically you declare under oath, this isn't my car, I'm not going to pay this fine. With the Amendment Act now, it creates a new structure called the Appeals Tribunal. That even if you make a representation and they don't agree with you, then you have the right to appeal to Appeals Tribunal. It's a national body consisting
of... it sounds crazy.
9 people. 9
there we
people,
go.
The entire country.
There we go.
That, then you have a right to approach a court.
All right, so now, it's obvious why OUTA has gone to the High Court and now landed up in the Constitutional Court. Did they give judgment? When will they give judgment?
Now, unfortunately, they haven't, so judgment is reserved. I think I'm in 2 minds. Personally, I'm in 2 minds of it. On the one hand, I really want the judgment to be made as soon as possible.
Sure.
But on the I want them to take their time and to consider everything that we've said and that was said in court in order for them to make the correct judgment. So judgment is reserved. We anticipate a judgment, hopefully not later than next year, March, but anything before that will be great. But unfortunately, it is the Constitutional Court, so we have to give them their time as to when they do give judgment.
What's going to happen if the Constitutional Court agrees with OUTA's argument?
If the Constitutional Court agrees that both the acts are unconstitutional and invalid, it means that government or parliament or even national government needs to go back to the drawing board. So it means we will just revert back to the CPA in Gauteng, so AARTO won't be effective in Gauteng anymore, and then the national rollout won't happen. So government will then have to go back to the drawing board to see how it might mitigate this encroachment of municipalities' executive and legislative competence.
Yes.
But there might be a variation of judgments given where we are partially successful and partially not successful, whatever the case may be. So it is kind of up in the air now, but even if the court agrees with us, AARTO will be no more.
On the other side of the coin, what will happen if the Concourt does not agree with OUTA's arguments?
Well, first of all, I think I'll be very disappointed in that.
I'm sure.
And I think our supporters will also be. But then the proof is in the pudding, as they say. And let's see how it works. And we will embark on the same kind of campaign that we did with e-tolls. Is government persisted and they wanted to proceed with e-tolls. And civil society stood up against them and say, okay, now try to implement this administrative system that you are boasting about. But again, unfortunately, we as a citizen of South Africa, I do believe that government is seriously facing a crisis of legitimacy. So we'll see how the system works. We don't believe the system will work, but we'll apply pressure through public participation, civil society intervention, and we'll take it as it comes. So unfortunately, you can't disagree with the Constitutional Court.
Yeah.
But again, if a country has laws, it's great, but if they can't enforce the laws, they don't have legitimacy and they won't get the desired effect.
These challenges around e-tolls, around AARTO, and we can keep going on, the various outer projects that are on the boil, thanks to the support of outer members, outer supporters and donors to outer. Have you got a message for the Outer Hour viewers and supporters of outer?
Just want to say thank you. Thank you so much for each and every person's support. Thank you for contributing. And you know someone that hasn't or don't contribute as of yet, nudge them a bit. We do a great job and we do great work and we do a great job, but we can't do it without your support. But thank you for each and every citizen who stood up and helped OUTA fight the good fight. So I think that is what I want to say, and I'm going to leave it there, Tom. Is at the end of the day, if you can't do much, that's okay. Just as long as you do something.
It's like a pit bull on a leash, Andrea van Heerden. When you cross her, you got to, she's attacking it. She's attacking AARTO and she's attacking e-tolls and she won't stop till it's over. It's always great to have Andrea van Heerden on the Outer Hour and see her face on screen. As it is seeing Rachel Fisher. Rachel, have you got a message for our Outer Hour viewers before we leave you tonight?
Well, absolutely. We cannot underscore enough how much we value each and every single person's contribution. Please continue however way you can, but also continue following what it is we are doing. We are constantly growing and evolving on our projects and how we approach them. So watch this space, follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and keep informed. I think that is the crux. Keep informed.
And there you go. What a show tonight. I mean, I learned a whole lot from Dr. Mbete a little earlier on. It was fantastic having her on the show talking electoral reform. There's so much that we need to know and learn as South Africans, isn't there? And so interesting to have people like Dr. Mbete on the show, as well as Rachel Fisher. Rachel is the Parliamentary Engagement and Research Manager for OUTA down in Cape Town. And you were just watching Andrea van Heerden, Senior Legal Project Manager at OUTA, fighting the AARTO fight on your behalf. And that's about it for the Outer Hour tonight. Can you believe that we're almost at the end of November? I mean, we're going to blink and then everyone's going to start talking about how many days there are till Christmas. And then in true South African style, around the 15th of December, we'll switch the country off for a month at least. And then 15th of January, we'll switch half the country back on. And then we'll finally get back to normal retail sales and life around March or April. We really are a unique bunch, aren't we, South Africans? We love our holidays and we love our December holidays and we love our public holidays and weekends off. Well, there's one weekend off between now and the next Outer Hour. I hope it's going to be a good one for you. I hope the next 7 days is full of fun, full of love, a bit of money, and good times for you and the people you love. May you treat people kindly and may they be kind to you in return. Thank you for joining us on the Outer Hour. Always fun being with you on a Wednesday at 7 p.m. Catch us next week, Wednesday at 7. Don't be late if you want to participate in the live show. If you press play after the fact and you're watching after the live show from inside or outside of South Africa, thank you for pressing the play button. Do remember to like and share this program so we can get it out to more and more concerned South Africans who want to see a better future for ourselves and our children. I know we always say our children, but I also want to see a better future for myself, so we better get cracking. See you next week at 7 p.m. for another live Outer Hour. It's a date. Don't be late. Until then, I miss you already. Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.